Greetings and salutations, everybody. E. Spencer Kite for Severe MMA here on Wednesday with one question for every fight. The UFC 280 edition. It is finally here. UFC 280 in Abu Dhabi on Saturday. Nice early start time for everybody. Fights start at like 6 a.m. here on the west coast of Canada. I cannot wait. If you've followed me over the years, you know that I love coffee, face punching, first thing in the morning. Get up, get fresh, get started with some great fights. This is a fantastic card. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to get right into this. Main event, Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, lightweight championship. My question is, how does Makhachev handle the step up in competition? Now, through no fault of his own, Islam Makhachev has yet to face or beat a top 5 opponent. He was scheduled to face Rafael dos Anjos at one point last year when they were when the UFC went to Abu Dhabi. He ended up facing Dan Hooker instead on short notice. He was supposed to face Beneil Dariush earlier this year in a main event in February. Dariush got hurt. He ended up facing Bobby Green, beats him as well. And so here we are. As I said, it's no fault of his own, but it still leaves room for the question. It still makes the question make sense, right? It still gives credence to the question. We ask all the time, whether it's here on this show, whether it's on the preview, we're always trying to figure out the information that we're missing. And right now, the information we're missing a little bit about Islam Makhachev is how does he match up? How does he look in the octagon against top 5 competition? He hasn't faced Michael Chandler. He hasn't faced Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, yet alone Charles Oliveira, who's beaten all 3 of those guys. Now, he's been absolutely dominant thus far, right? Along this run, 10-fight winning streak. You know, as I say all the time, you don't win 10 straight fights in the UFC at any level, or at any level, really, if you're not an outstanding fighter. And he is an outstanding talent. But this is a different level, and we've seen very good fighters on very good winning streaks stumble when they get to this point. Skill-wise, he's got the ability to hang, right? That wrestling, that grappling is outstanding. But what happens when there's 2 parts to this, really. What happens, one, if Charles Oliveira just comes out like he has in these past couple of fights, where he's ready to go minute 1. And he's ready to go right out of the gate, and he hits you with something, and he's throwing those knees, and he's jumping on your back, and he's getting after you because he knows what this is all about. He's been here. He's done this, got the t-shirt, got the belt, and wants to get it back. The other part of it is, what happens if he gets into deep water? Now, I spoke with Islam last week for a story that's up on UFC.com right now, and we talked about sort of everything, right? We talked about the fight. And he said, look, my plan is to take this guy into deep water and just drown him. That's what I want to do. And in theory, it makes sense. And he's been into the later rounds. The fight with Thiago Moises obviously went into the 4th round. He's prepared for some main event fights, but they haven't gotten there. And those main event fights weren't against Charles Oliveira. And they weren't with the lightweight title hanging in the balance in Abu Dhabi with this opportunity to bring a title back to Dagestan, which is something that he talked about being very focused on and being very important to him. And so I just really want to see, I'm just really going to be paying super close attention to see kind of how he reacts to these moments, to the pieces of this fight as it unfolds. There's a very good chance that he comes out and he's cool as can be, he's smooth as can be, there's no hiccups, and this is just seamless. There's a path for him winning dominantly. James Krause, in my coach conversations on the UFC website, laid out that he thinks Islam just rolls through this fight, grapples early, tires Charles Oliveira out, and then gets him, 3rd, 4th round, gets a finish. It's there. It's a possibility, but so too is Islam Makhachev kind of struggling a little bit, stumbling a little bit now that he's at this level, now that he's facing world-class competition and the elite of the elite for the first time. Co-main event, bantamweight title fight, Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. The question I have is, does Sterling have a plan B if wrestling isn't there? Everyone knows Aljo's coming out looking to wrestle, and he's an absolute nightmare. If he gets you down, if he gets on your back, like you're not getting up. It's just the way it is. He's a different kind of strong, to quote Corey Sandhagen, or to paraphrase Corey Sandhagen, who I spoke to very recently about this. The really interesting thing to me, though, and I cite UFC stats here, looked it up. Aljo averages 1.71 takedowns per 15 minutes and a 21% success rate, while TJ Dillashaw has an 86% takedown defense score. I know some of that is the first fight with Petrosyan. We've seen other fights from Aljo where it's not really spamming takedowns, but it's pressing hard for a lot of takedowns and they're not necessarily there, but he's still successful, right? Overall in the fight, he's still successful. The thing I'm interested here, and as I said, with the question, is what happens if and when TJ Dillashaw starts stuffing these takedowns? We saw it in the last fight with Petrosyan. Comes out after a sort of stalematey first round. Aljo wrestles really well in rounds 2 and 3 and builds that lead and builds that success. But 4 and 5 were tough, man. 4 and 5 were him kind of just trying to get to the finish line, and against a guy like TJ Dillashaw, who's going to make him work for those takedowns in the first bunch of rounds and has good wrestling. He was a collegiate wrestler himself back in the day at Cal State Fullerton. Like it's there. He doesn't use it that much, but it's there. This is an opportunity. This could be a fight where we see a lot of sprawl and brawl from TJ Dillashaw, right? Where he just sees these things coming and knows to get his hips back and then start throwing hands. What does Aljamain have if that's the case? If that's what we get to, what does Aljo bring out? Because the striking is awkward. He throws a bunch of kicks. They're all weird angles. They come at you at different timings. And that can be challenging. But TJ's been in so many big fights. He's been through championship battles time and again. This is his 9th 5-round championship fight in his last 11 fights. Dude's been here. He's not going to be shook by anything, even if he gets down a couple rounds, because we've seen him finish late, right? The 2 Borralho fights back in the day. We've seen him finish early. We've seen him go the distance after 2 years off with Corey Sandhagen in his last fight, in a fight where he jacks up his knee in the very first round. So like, we know TJ Dillashaw is going to be there for all 25 minutes if that's what it requires. And I'm just not sure of what Aljo has as the backup plan, as the fail safe, if the wrestling doesn't get him to where he needs it to get him to through the first 15 minutes, if not more. Middle fight on the main card, a name we've already mentioned a couple times, Petrosyan against Sean O'Malley. The question here is the obvious one. Can Sean O'Malley rise to the occasion? It's unfair to me to call this a put up or shut up fight for Sean O'Malley, because like the guy's mostly won his fights and he's not the only one that has been singing his praises and speaking about how talented he is, the upside that he has. But like at the same time, he kind of still downplays the loss to Chito Vera. He comes out after the fight with Pedro Munoz and says, I'm the first guy to stop Pedro Munoz inside. Like, he makes it hard for you to, makes it hard for me, I should say, because there's lots of people that love this dude. He makes it hard for me to really back him and really get behind him. And so I look at this fight as, okay, man, come and prove some of this stuff. Come and show that you are on this level. I think he's a very good fighter. I think he's surely skilled. He's definitely technical and talented and gifted and works very, very hard. But kind of similar to the Makhachev thing, but even in a more advanced way, this is, you're going from facing Pedro Munoz to a guy that's been the champion twice. A guy that a bunch of people probably still consider the top bantamweight in the UFC, if not the world. And so this is, again, it's not put up or shut up, but it's like, we're going to find out about you here. And like, the really cool thing to me is that O'Malley can lose this fight and still gain a lot of ground, right? If he goes out and he pushes Petr Yan for 15 minutes and this is a close fight and we get a split decision or we get 29-28 for Yan, but it's a really competitive fight, Sean O'Malley's stock is still going to rise, even with the loss, because you're losing to a former champion. You're losing to a guy universally regarded as one of the best bantamweights on the planet. The trouble for Sean O'Malley, or the potential rub for Sean O'Malley, is that if he goes out here and gets absolutely blasted and just has nothing for Petr Yan, it becomes tough to come back from. Now, I don't think he loses all of the ground because, as I've said, Petr Yan is one of the very best bantamweights in the world. But it increases the scrutiny on Sean next time out if he gets crushed on Saturday. It goes from being looked okay in a loss and his stock goes up. If it goes the other way, it's okay, let's put him in there with whoever's at number like 5, number 7, and he's really got to look good or else then we're having some questions, because then it would be 4 fights against top competition, people ranked ahead of him that he's struggled against. And so, like everybody else, I'm super excited to see this fight play out. I'm super interested to see what we get out of Sean O'Malley on Saturday, because I think it can go any number of ways. I think his stock could rise or fall depending on how this plays out. And I just want to see where we get to. Lightweight fight, Beneil Dariush, Mateusz Gamrot. Love this fight. Can't wait to see it. My question is one that sucks. I hate that I'm asking this question, but did Beneil Dariush miss his window? I kind of feel like the fight with Makhachev falling through in February creates a situation now where Dariush is kind of in limbo. I think he can work his way out of it. I think he can still get to a good spot, but it's going to take more work. So if that fight with Makhachev happens in February as scheduled, Benny doesn't break his leg, break his ankle, whichever it was, and isn't out for this amount of time until Saturday, and he goes out and he gets a victory, then he's at the head of the line, right? He's the one facing Charles Oliveira on Saturday, not Makhachev. Instead, the fight doesn't happen. He gets hurt. He's got to rehab. He's got to come back. All of that went very, very well. But now he's got a tough assignment against a younger, hungry, more dynamic fighter in Gamrot, who's coming off a very good performance, whether you agree with the scoring of the fight or not. A very good performance against another elite competitor in Armen Tsarukyan back in June. And then we look at the greater picture in the lightweight division. Alexander Volkanovski says that he's the backup for this fight, and he's next in line. Dana White has sort of been non-committal about whether Volk's getting the next shot, but it wouldn't surprise me as much as I don't want to see it. Rafael Fiziev is coming. Tsarukyan is coming. Damir Ismagulov is coming. Well, the winner of that fight is coming. Jalen Turner's not far out. You've still got the pack of Chandler, Gaethje, and Poirier that are all hanging around. Conor McGregor is still a big enough name that if he decides 55, I'm coming back, he's no more than a win away from making his claim. And so this sort of feels like you got to go out and absolutely run through Mateusz Gamrot and then get on the microphone afterwards and call out every one of those people by name. You got to call out Alexander Volkanovski and say, look, if you want to come to this division, you got to come through me. You got to call out Rafael Fiziev, or the winner of the Armen Tsarukyan Damir Ismagulov, or the winner of Dustin Poirier Michael Chandler. You've got to make your case and stand your ground. Because if this is close, if this is super competitive, if this is 29-28 or a split, I think Benny's going to have a longer road put in front of him because Volk is there, because those already established names that Charles Oliveira has subsequently already trounced are still there and still names and still draws. And so I just wonder if he's missed his window, if he's missed his opportunity. I hope that isn't the case. I personally think that the winner of this fight should be next in line to challenge for the title. Dariush has won 7 straight, Gamrot 4 straight. Winner of this has the second longest active streak in the division behind Charles Oliveira. It's just, from a meritocracy standpoint, it's the fight that makes sense, but I don't know that we get there. Main card opener, Katlyn Chookagian, Manon Fiorot. My question is, will Fiorot be able to out Chookagian Katlyn Chookagian? So here's what I mean. Both women like to work from range, work behind kicks, but Fiorot throws more, gets hit less, and has a greater propensity or ability to mix in takedowns. Now, some of her numbers on UFCstats.com, which is a terrific resource that I think people should check out more frequently, are skewed because she came out in her first 2 fights and she dominated Victoria Leonardo and Tabitha Ricci, who was fighting up in weight and taking that fight on short notice. But she had good volume throughout her fight with Mayra Bueno Silva. She mixed in a bunch of takedowns in the second round of her last fight against Jennifer Maia and was solid in the volume striking on either sides of that. So the first and the third rounds. She has a power edge. She has a physicality edge. For as good as Katlyn Chookagian has been and most certainly is in this division, this feels like one of those fights where Fiorot might be like the evolution of Katlyn Chookagian, or like the next wave of Katlyn Chookagian. Like, we took the Katlyn Chookagian mold and then we gave her a little more power, a little more meanness, a little more physicality, and said, go on. And so after saying the French chick can get it, we're going to see if Katlyn Chookagian can go out there and do what she does. Because look, 4 straight wins. Only people she's lost to in the last 5 years are Valentina Shevchenko and Jessica Andrade. And that is nothing to hang your head about. She has a terrific resume. She has a tremendous overall career. She doesn't get enough credit for it. But I wonder if her days as being the sort of, and the boss before the boss, are starting to come to an end, and we're going to see Manon Fiorot join that exclusive list of fighters that have beaten Katlyn Chookagian in the flyweight division. Final fight of the prelims is a great fight. Belal Muhammad versus Sean Brady. My question here is, can Brady dictate the terms of engagement? Now, as always, that sounds very, very basic because it's something that we're always looking for in these fights. But here's why, to me, it's super important in this fight. Brady needs to do his level best at keeping Belal Muhammad from coming forward and being on him. Belal is relentless. He knows how to weaponize his cardio and his pace. Those are 2 of his primary weapons. He's not a guy that's coming out and blast wrestling you. He's not power wrestling you. He's not throwing a million strikes at you and beating the hell out of you with power and good, clean, super technical striking. He's just swarming you, and he's just suffocating you, and he's just drowning you for 15 minutes. And I say that with all the love and respect and admiration for what Belal Muhammad does. But if you're Sean Brady, you need to be the guy that's going first at all points, because in the few times that we've seen Belal Muhammad struggle or be beaten in the UFC, that's a big part of the recipe. Go out, put the pressure on him, make him work backwards. Be the guy sticking a jab in his face. Be the guy threatening takedowns. Be the guy maybe wrestling him, making him expend some of that energy in the wrestling department. Because the other piece of this is that we've seen Sean Brady tire over the case of 3-round fights against guys that aren't Belal Muhammad, right? He got tired in the fight with Michael Chiesa. Now, some of that is because he was effectively grappling for the first 2 rounds. And he even had moments in the 3rd round where he grappled well. But he sure didn't look good going backwards at the start of that 3rd round and at the very tail end of the 3rd round when Michael Chiesa was putting it on him. And Belal Muhammad's going to look to do that from the jump. We know that Belal is going to come out looking to close the distance, looking to get on his hips and drive him into the fence and then drag him into the canvas and just kind of smother him and swarm him and make him deal with all kinds of problems. And so if Sean Brady's going to continue this run and he's going to make the most of this opportunity against the number 5 welterweight in the division, he's got to be the guy, in my opinion, that's going out there and leading the dance, that's dictating the terms of engagements, that's setting the tone for this fight from the get-go. Because if he lets Belal Muhammad get going and he lets Belal Muhammad get on him, it is going to be a long night. Middleweights, Makhmud Muradov and Caio. The question here is, how does Barralho fare against non-Dana White Contender Series competition? In his first 2 fights, he fought Gadzhi Omargadzhiev and Armen Petrosyan, both of whom are on this fight card later on, so we'll get to them shortly. 2 fellow Season 5 graduates from the Contender Series. Looked good against both, got victories against both, but there were elements and moments in those fights where he looked good, but not great. Faded a little bit in each of the fights, more so in the fight with Petrosyan than Omargadzhiev that ended with the technical decision. But now he's facing a guy that has 32 career fights, was on a 14-fight winning streak before his last fight, which was a loss to Gerald Meerschaert. And somebody in Muradov that is fairly well-rounded, like just a good, solid, skilled, professional veteran fighter. And I know that sounds very generic, like I just created a fighter on the UFC game or whatever, but like there's something to be said for just being a really competent hand. And I think Muradov is just a really competent hand, right? Like he's a good, solid test at this point for the 29-year-old Brazilian. Like clearly the UFC is interested in pushing and promoting Caio Barralho. This is his 3rd fight of the year. His last 2 fights were not high profile, but they were on the main card. They were further up the main card than you would expect for someone coming off the Contender Series. He's been successful thus far. He's getting a little step up in competition. But like this is a different kind of test. Muradov's a guy that can beat him. Surely. He's a guy that's earned 3 victories in the UFC and was expected or forecasted the favorite to beat Gerald Meerschaert last time out and keep that winning streak going. He's somebody I've seen people back before that loss talk about him as a potential contender, or at least somebody that can get into the top 15. And so this is one of those fights for Caio Barralho where it's, you're going to show us something and we're going to learn something about you from this fight. We're going to see maybe where the ceiling is, maybe where the floor is at right now, how great the upside is, how much more room there is to grow. So far, he's been one of the top rookies of the year. He'll be in our list of top newcomers at the end of the year, or my list of top newcomers at the end of the year, which I will surely put out on Severe MMA. But this is a different challenge than facing fellow Contender Series alums that have a limited amount of experience. This is a legit, seasoned, experienced opponent, and we're going to see what he's got. Move to the light heavyweight division, Nikita Krylov versus Volkan Oezdemir. My question here is, who stands as the gatekeeper to contention in the 205-pound weight class? Now, first things first. The word gatekeeper is not a bad word. It is not a dirty word. Neither is journeyman. We've bastardized these words and sort of misrepresented them for far too long in this sport. And years ago, I tried to, lead a revolution to get people to understand the proper meanings. Gatekeeper just means you're that guy that isn't able to quite get into the elite or push all the way to title contention, but you have a standing at a certain point. And for these guys, it's inside the top 10 in the light heavyweight division. Now, obviously, Volkan Oezdemir fought for the title at one point, but he's since regressed and sort of leveled out where he is right now, right? These guys are number 8 and number 10, respectively, in the division. I believe Ozdemir's 8. Nikita Krylov is 10, so reverse those. But like, there's an opportunity here to have a long, fruitful career, kind of being the guy that emerging talents and hopefuls have to beat. And before everybody goes, well, you really want to do that? Jeremy Stevens had a hell of a career doing this. He spent 4 or 5 years just hanging out at like number 6 or 7 in the featherweight division, and he beat the guys that weren't good enough to get to the top. and he'd lose to the guys that were. And it just kept going that way. And it worked out pretty all right for the little heathen until the very end of it. Michael Bisping was this dude at middleweight until he just, happened to find happened to throw a left hand that found Luke Rockhold's chin. Like this is where Mike Bisping was. Now he maximized it by being a great heel, by being a great personality, by being a star, by having England behind him, by putting himself out there in far greater magnitude than I would think either of these guys will. But from a career standpoint, being the sort of 7th best light heavyweight for the next 3 years means good opportunities. It's a chance to win some good fights, some big fights, potentially still move forward and not be stuck further behind this, fighting lesser known guys. It's an interesting fight. They both got wins in London in July. Curious to see how it plays out. Krylov is a guy that I've always been sort of not enamored with, but like he just feels like there's that switch that just hasn't been flipped. Like there's that little bit more that we could see from him and we just haven't seen it. Oezdemir looked great against Paul Craig, fought a very, very smart fight in London. So we'll just see how this goes and see who ends up kind of holding down the middle of the light heavyweight division going forward. Next up, we move to featherweight. Zubaira Tukhugov against Lucas Almeida. The question is which Tukhugov shows up. So last time out against Ricardo Ramos, he looked amazing. He looked great. He looked like the guy that for years we thought of as a potential contender, as a guy that could run into the top 15 and be problems for a bunch of people. The problem is that before that, he looked just kind of okay against Hakeem Dawodu. It was all right. He's just this Jekyll and Hyde fighter that has loads of talent and skill, but is just so inconsistent. Like he's so hit or miss that it's impossible for me to sit here right now and be like, well, this is the version we're going to get on Saturday night. This is the guy. Because if I could know for sure that the guy that faced Ricardo Ramos is showing up, he runs through Lucas Almeida. He fights technically. He fights smart. Good volume, good movement, good pressure. Runs through this guy. The trouble is that Lucas Almeida can crack. He's tough as shit. He's going to hang in there like he did in the fight against Mike Trezano. And if you're not prepped, if you're not ready, he'll do what he did to Mike Trezano and just catch you out. Tukhugov's one of those dudes, like he's so confusing, and it's been so many years that we've been sitting here doing this, right? That we've been sitting here going, man, if he could fight more consistently, if he showed a little more passion, if he showed a little more focus. As I said, if the guy that fought last October in Abu Dhabi turns up, this is light work. He goes through Almeida easy. Almeida's loss on the Contender Series was to Daniel Zellhuber, and not to do MMA math, but we saw Daniel Zellhuber's UFC debut. It was not great. He's a good fighter. He's an interesting prospect because of his size, because of his length. But like focused, locked in Tukhugov should run through Lucas Almeida. But we could get the guy that wants to get in there and just kind of, complain to the referee and not engage and throw 1 or 2 shots a minute. And that's about it. And then it just goes off the rails. Then it's crazy. Then it's all bets are off because Almeida can crack. Like I said, he'll hang in there. He'll stand in there. He'll get in a fist fight with you. And if you're not careful, he will put you out. So we got to see which version of Tukhugov shows up on Saturday before we can figure out who's going to win this one, which makes predictions later in the week and bets later in the week so difficult. Welterweight fight, Abubakar Nurmagomedov versus Gadzhi Omargadzhiev. The question is, can Nurmagomedov set the tone for the team for the evening? So this question depends on how much weight you put on teammates all fighting on the same card and sort of the early result or previous results impacting, influencing the mindset and then potentially even performance of the athletes that follow. So Nurmagomedov, Tukhugov, and Islam Makhachev all trained together, all prepped for this together, rolling in together, and Manap is the first one out the gate. And so he hasn't fought in quite some time. Does he come out and feel like he's got some pressure because he needs to set the tone, because he needs to be the first that goes out and gets a win and, gets everybody fired up for Tukhugov to follow him and come out and build that momentum till we get to Islam down later in the night? Does he come out and, if he loses, does he feel pressure of losing and that makes him tight? Like this is interesting, right? Like depending on this result, depending on how much you think about this stuff, this is a really important fight potentially, right? It could mean nothing. There are some fighters, there are some teams where we've seen it, right? Multiple members of the same team on the same card. One goes out and loses, the next comes out, has a great performance. We've also seen the Pettis brothers, for instance. Sergio goes out and loses. Anthony comes out and he's flat because he watched his brother lose. He watched his baby brother lose, and that's tough. I don't know how these guys roll. I don't know what the influence is going to be. My guess would be is that they're pretty good at compartmentalizing it and doing the like, well, that was his fight. Mine's different. But we'll see, because it's an interesting thing. And it is something I do think either consciously or subconsciously will sit on Abubakar Nurmagomedov as he goes out there as somebody that, was heralded as having the potential to be an impact fighter and just hasn't come anywhere near living up to that reputation, living up to that, famous last name that he carries. And Gadzhi Omargadzhiev coming down from middleweight, looking to rebound from a loss in his debut, a guy that can pretty well match him skill for skill and talent for talent in terms of where this fight takes place is a tough assignment, is a good assignment. And so I'm really curious to see if Nurmagomedov can go out, be present, be patient, get a good victory, and sort of set the course for this crew over the course of the night on Saturday. Another middleweight fight, Armen Petrosyan against AJ Dobson. My question is, will Dobson show more than in his promotional debut? I was very excited to see AJ Dobson compete in his debut against Jacob Malkoun. It took about 38 seconds for me to not be excited anymore. He got absolutely dominated, out-hustled at every turn. He was tired very early. It was one of those fights where within the first round, I sat there going, what did I base my backing this dude on? Was it that he looked good on the Contender Series against a guy that he was kind of designed to look good against? Was it that, I wanted to see Mark Coleman get a win as a coach, that he's training with good guys like the Hammer and Matt Brown out in Columbus? I don't know, but this is a chance for him to regroup. Petrosyan has looked good, though not, world beater by any stretch. He won his debut against Gregory Rodriguez, lost his last fight, as we talked about earlier, against Caio. But this is one of those things, man. You're AJ Dobson, you come into the UFC, you win this contract on season 5 of Contender Series. You don't want to go 0-2. You don't want to be another one of these people coming off the show that gets 2 quick losses early. I know Slava Borchov got a win early in the year, but call him, ask him how he's feeling sitting on 2 losses where he got dominated in the last 2 fights and showed deficiencies in the last 2 fights. In terms of stylistically, this should be a fight AJ Dobson has a very good chance to win, or a clear path to victory with the wrestling. We saw that in Petrosyan's last fight against Caio. First 2 rounds, took him down with ease. Blast doubles, just run him across the cage, bounce him off the fence, put him on the ground, keep him there. AJ Dobson should, in theory, be able to do the same thing. But will he? That's the question. And if he can't, it may be 2-0 for AJ Dobson. Move to the flyweight division. Muhammad Makhachev versus Malcolm Gordon. The question is, what improvements will Makhachev show this time around? So, I absolutely love that Makhachev isn't getting hustled up the division too quickly, right? He's 22 years old. He's 7 fights into his pro career. It's okay to give him time to improve and grow and learn and get better organically without sort of doing the race him up the ladder. Now, we know he wants to do the John Jones thing. He wants to challenge the John Jones record for being the youngest champion in UFC history. The good thing of that is that he turned 22 in July. And so he's basically got like 16 months from now until the John Jones date, which I figured it out. It's written down here. We'll talk about it tomorrow on, on 10 Things I Like. It's only been 3 months since his last fight. He fought in London in July against Charles Johnson. It was a good win. He wasn't super happy with going the distance. I think it's a positive. I think it will be a net positive overall. But what I want to see is what he's sort of learned and taken away from that performance. The thing I would really like to see is an Ian Gary style performance. And what I mean by that is I think we've seen in a couple of Ian Gary's recent fights, he's gone in there with the intention of using all 15 minutes to learn, to try some stuff, to work on some stuff, to get a little live experience with things he's been working on in the gym, and to just log that time, right? There's no greater teacher than live action in the octagon, than live experience against somebody that is trying to beat you and trying to hurt you. It's all well and good to train with absolute killers like Ian Gary does at Kill Cliff FC. But it's different when it's Gabriel Green trying to hurt you and it's Darian Weeks trying to hurt you. And so I would love to see Makhachev go out there and get more of that experience. Maybe not struggle or have the challenges he felt he had against Charles Johnson, but go out there and be able to get into his striking a little bit. Then have a round where it's getting into the wrestling a little bit and getting into the grappling a little bit. Sort of take that approach that Harry talks about with someone like Umar Nurmagomedov, right? Let's go out and bank 2 rounds. Let's go out and do the fighting, do the stuff we need to do to get up 2-0. And then in the third, we can have some fun and you can try some stuff. And if you finish them, great. And if not, doesn't matter. We've gained experience. That's what I'd like to see. I don't know if we're going to see it. I don't know if there's going to be like clear evolution or clear development in such a short window since his last fight. But I'm all in on Makhachev, and I can't wait to see him compete again. I'm glad he's getting a third fight this year. I'm glad it's against someone that has the experience that Malcolm Gordon has without being too far up the divisional ladder. I think this should go well for him Saturday. I can't wait to see it. Opening fight of the night, Karol Rosa, Lina Landsberg. My question is, how does Rosa rebound following her loss to Sarah McMahon? Now, saying that Karol Rosa was on the brink of contention prior to that fight is probably a stretch. She's still ranked in the top 10, and like, this is where the shallowness of bantamweight really comes into play, right? I think she's still ranked number 8. But prior to that fight, she was on a 6-fight winning streak. She was unbeaten in the UFC. It wasn't great names. It's Betch Cahea, it's Jocelyn Edwards, Vanessa Mello, and then Lara Procopio in her debut. But she just had nothing for Sarah McMahon's wrestling. And like, that's literally the one thing Sarah McMahon is bringing to the fight. You signed that contract to face Sarah McMahon. Day one of camp needs to be, here's all the things we're going to do when this great, big, strong Olympic silver medalist comes out and looks to put us on the ground. And for most of that fight, Karol Rosa was like, I got nothing. And so, positive elements, she's still young. She's still only 27. There's room to grow. This can be a huge learning experience, right? That fight, that loss can be a huge educational moment, a teaching tool. Problem is, Lina Landsberg is still a pretty tough out. She's kind of grimy and kind of gritty. And I mean, she gave Pani Kianzad a good fight in her first fight in a year and a half after giving birth to her daughter with former UFC fighter Akira Khorasani, who will be in her corner. And so with the rust shaken off and a chance to come out and push her way back all the way into the top 10, guaranteed Lina Landsberg shows up on Saturday, and she's going to be in her face and looking to throw elbows and smash in the clinch and do a lot of the things that Sarah McMahon did. So has Karol Rosa learned? Has she figured out some stuff that she can do to improve this? Or was that sort of us finding out this is where the ceiling is, this is the blueprint to beating her, and it's not going to get better anytime soon until she makes some drastic improvements? You'll find out on Saturday. That's it for one question. Those are the questions. I have many more. I'll address them on the preview show. I'll address them on 10 things. I'll address them in the Punch Drunk predictions and the betting show. So you want to make a bet later in the week. This card, man, is it Saturday yet? Can it be Saturday already? This is such a good card. The final 6 fights, I wrote about it for my preview that's coming up for OSDB Sports on Friday. You could take these last 4 non-title fights and they would be great as main events on fight nights. That's when you know a card is special, because then we still got 2 championship fights after it. I can't wait. I hope that you can't wait. I hope you are as excited as I am, as I know the rest of the crew here at Severe MMA is. Thank you for watching this. We will be back throughout the rest of the week. As I've mentioned, 10 things on Thursday, Punch Drunk predictions, and So You Want to Make a Bet on Friday. We will have the preview show, Ian O'Neill, Harry Powell, and myself, probably Sean as well, Shawning Podcasts. We're going to do a live stream of the event on Saturday, so check that out. Until then, get hype, stay hype, take care of yourselves, take care of one another. We'll talk soon.